Hello there and welcome to another live chapter reading for Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Today I shall be reading from The Executive's Decision, Book 1 of the Keller Family Series by Bernadette Marie. Chapter 1. Thunder rippled through the grey clouds that loomed overhead. Regan Keller raised her eyes to the sky. Please, please don't rain. As she sent up the silent prayer, she felt the first drop hit her forehead. The nervous flutter in her stomach quickened as she looked down at her watch. Surely her day couldn't get any worse, but the sky opened up and those around her crowded together in the bus stop shelter. Her hair, tied in a tail at the base of her neck, dripped rain down her back as she hunched in her coat. How could she have forgotten her umbrella? Had her car been running, she'd have the one tucked safely away in the glove compartment, because spring in Tennessee often meant sudden storms. She should carry one in her bag, but had suffered a lapse in memory, having opted for the sunny beaches of Hawaii for the past 2 years. As the bus arrived, those under the shelter huddled onto it ahead of her, claiming every seat. Soaking wet, Regan wedged herself between two people and held onto the handrail above her head. She looked out of the window at the commuters driving themselves to work in the pouring rain. That should have been her. A bitter-faced old woman sat below her, her oversized bag occupying the next seat. Regan bent to ask her to move it, but the woman glared up at her and gave a grunt that sounded like a dog's bark. Regan flinched and tried to look away, but she was compelled to keep an eye on the woman. The man to the other side of the vacant seat snickered. Regan looked down at him in his long black overcoat and perfect hair, hemmed in between the old lady's bag and an overweight man in a jogging suit. He was as pinned in his seat as she was to the people around her. She would have given him a piece of her mind for laughing at her, had the bus not jolted to a sudden stop. He lurched forward, then back, and tossed Regan onto the man's lap. I would have offered you my seat, he said with a bright grin as the bus lurched again. Why you? She struggled to free herself, but the crowd moved in tightly around them as the bus bounced down the street. The pace of her heart kicked into gear, and she could feel the sweat bead on her brow. She hadn't been this close to a man in over a year, and the panic of having him hold her on his lap was making her more than uncomfortable. I need to stand up. You might as well sit. He wrapped his arms around her. Doesn't look like you'll be standing again any time soon. Regan took a few deep and cleansing breaths. She forced down the panic that was filling her body and tried to push it away. Alexander Hamilton thought she was dead. There should be no danger of sitting on the lap of a nice-looking man. She should find it within her to enjoy the experience and focus on something else. He didn't have an accent native to Tennessee like hers. Perhaps the rain had caught him off guard as well. If she didn't relax, she'd have a heart attack, and this nice gentleman who wasn't from Nashville would probably be blamed for her death on the bus on his way to work. Accepting her predicament at face value would be a prime opportunity to let go of bitter feelings for the opposite gender, though after what she'd been through, she wasn't sure she could. The thought of ever loving another man or letting one touch her made her palms sweat and her stomach clench. The man smiled at her, and a dimple formed in his cheek. This is your first time on this bus, isn't it? He pushed back a wet wisp of hair from her forehead, and she flinched away. It's always crowded, but I know I would have seen you. My car wouldn't start this morning. She pressed her hand to her jittery stomach and willed it to settle. I start a new job today. Car trouble couldn't have come at a worse time. New job? Congratulations. So what is this new job? God, he was handsome, and wouldn't it be nice to enjoy the ride? But she wasn't. Executive assistant. The words shook as she spoke. Pretty important. You think it's just some glorified secretary, don't you? She clenched her teeth and her fists. Why wouldn't she be angry? The last man she'd worked for had interpreted the title executive assistant as the license to run her life and to ruin it. No, I was serious. It's a very important position. He looked sincere. So where is this new job? Benson and Hart. Real estate development. Yes, her breath was becoming harder to push through her lungs. I should get off your lap. You drew in my day, he laughed easily, so she tried to relax. So who's the executive assistant will you be? Zachary Benson. She looked around for a place to stand. CEO? He must have been very impressed with you. I've never met him. His current assistant is having a baby and leaving the company. He was out of town when she interviewed me. She thought about Mary Ellen, his current assistant. The interview had a motherly quality to it. She wasn't sure whether it was because Mary Ellen was pregnant or that she was worried for her boss. I think she takes good care of him. It'll be a hard pair of shoes to fill. And if that hadn't had her stomach tied in knots, here she was having a conversation about it with a man she didn't know while sitting on his lap. Had she completely forgotten the last man she'd gotten this close to had tried to kill her? I'm sure he'll be pleased with her choice. Thank you. She wanted to wiggle away from the hard muscles she could feel in his chest, from his arms that held her tight against him, and from the legs of a man who obviously kept in shape. She couldn't, so she kept talking. I hope he likes me. I can't imagine him not wanting to meet me first. Maybe he's ugly. Finally, a laugh rolled from her throat. That's not what Mary Ellen said, she tucked in her lips. She says he's a hottie. Hottie? His voice lit with humour. Well, you'll enjoy your job then. Strictly business here. I don't get involved with the boss, she said sternly. Not anymore. This was, after all, her chance to take back her life after making such a big mistake. The bus stopped and the old woman stood and grabbed her bag. Move! She shoved her way through the people who climbed on and made her way out to the door. Before Regan could stand and claim a seat, the crowd pushed around her and pushed her closer against the stranger, his arms wrapped tightly around her as others dropped down beside them. You'll stop as the next one, he offered, and she nodded. So what's your name? Regan. You're native to Tennessee, aren't you? Your accent gives you away. I was born in Memphis. I spent most of my life in Nashville, though. I did a stint in Los Angeles and then lived in Maui for the last 2 years. I missed home, though. The more she tried to suppress her nerves, the more she talked. Los Angeles, tried your hand at Hollywood? No, she shook her head. I worked for a prominent lawyer who had some big-name clients, but I wasn't seeking fame and fortune. Well, Miss Executive Assistant, I'm glad you came home, or this would have been a very boring ride this morning. The bus stopped and most of the people began to move to the door. This is your stop? She finally stood and turned to exit with the crowd without looking back. The man caught her hand and held it. Her very core shook, and her first instinct was to rip her hand away, but she needed to move on and not be so damn afraid of every man that gave her attention. Would you have lunch with me? He asked. What? She looked back at the people climbing on the bus. If she didn't exit the bus now, she'd miss her stop. Oh, I don't think so. Meet me at the hot dog stand at noon, just on the north corner of your building, he said, with a wink and a nod. She couldn't think to speak. She nodded as she hurried off the bus. The rain had subsided for the time being. Regan had almost dried off as she sat on the handsome man's lap. The smell of his cologne lingered on her coat. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of him. She stopped as she neared the door and turned to see the bus drive away. He was watching her from the window and he waved. It occurred to her she didn't even know his name. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Get over it. Move on. Not everyone wanted to hurt her. Not every man was evil with ulterior motives. No, some were just nice men who wanted to take you to lunch. Well, it wasn't like he'd asked her to stay at a hotel. He'd offered to buy her a hot dog. Really, it was harmless. And he'd assumed she was too busy with her new job if she just didn't show up. But she wanted to. Well, there was no better time to move on with her life, and no better way to get to know the man on whose lap he'd ridden to work than over a hot dog. A tingle of hope shot through her. She needed to start taking back her life the way she wanted it. No more mistakes, no more regrets. It was her life now, and she was going to enjoy it. Mary Ellen Rothschild, the very pregnant assistant to Zachary Benson, was waiting for her as she exited the elevator. There you are, I was worried. She held out her hand. Regan took her hand, giving it a firm professional shake. Car trouble, I had to ride the bus. Mary Ellen crinkled her nose and let out a grunt. I hate the bus. So do I, she confessed as Mary Ellen led her through the office to the break room. But this morning wasn't too bad. It was wet and crowded, and there was this really mean old lady. She laughed and Mary Ellen glanced at her. When the bus jerked, I fell and landed right in some guy's lap. How did that go? She raised her eyebrows playfully. I have a lunch date with him at noon on the corner. Well, there, she committed to it, and suddenly her stomach gurgled, and she knew it wasn't as much from hunger as it was from excitement for the chance to have a normal moment with a man. Stranger. Mary Ellen showed her to her locker where she could hang her coat and secure her purse. She introduced her to a few people and headed to her new office, her new corner of the world, her new beginning. "This is your office," Mary Ellen said as they entered a small office away from the cubicles in the main area. "Mr. Benson's office is right through here." Mary Ellen walked into the other larger office behind hers. "This way you can still have your near, but be shut off from the rest of the floor. His private conference room is right through there." She pointed to the adjoining room. Both had full walls of windows that looked out over the river that ran through downtown Nashville. Mary Ellen walked her into Zachary's office. He likes his coffee in his own coffee pot. She filled the pot with water and poured it into the coffee maker on the counter. He likes it strong, so 4 scoops and set it to strong brew. She stuck out her tongue as if she could taste it. "Later in the day, check on it. The man cannot remember to turn it off." She started the machine. She dusted off her hands and looked around the office. "His bathroom is private. This is important. He often showers here and sleeps on the Murphy bed." She pointed to a set of doors in the wall. "That is a secret only you and I know. But you have to know it so you don't startle him or yourself. He never brings anyone up with him, so no worries there," she added with a wink. "He does have a private entry from the parking garage, so you always want to knock before entering. Again, not to startle him or you." A man who would be forgetful of his coffee and sleep and shower in his office could not have much of a social life. Perhaps Mary Ellen was his only source of companionship. He would be in short supply of that from Reagan. Mary Ellen did say he was a hottie, but she just couldn't picture it. From the sounds of it, having him scare you has been a problem in the past. When he first took over this office, I'll admit I walked in a few times and screamed out loud. Even last week I thought I'd go into labour, he'd startled me so badly. She snorted a laugh and rubbed her oversized stomach. "I've never caught him in an awkward situation, but to think you're alone and find him sitting on the couch is a bit of a shock." "I can imagine." The image of a balding middle-aged man sprawled out on the couch with his feet upon the coffee table filled her head. Mary Ellen walked towards his imposing cherry wood desk and situated in the corner of the room. "He likes his newspapers on his desk when he comes in. Wall Street Journal on top, USA Today under that, and then the local papers. He'll want 20 minutes after he comes in to get settled, and then you can come in with any messages or business for him to attend to." Reagan nodded, absorbing her new instructions. They walked out of his office and settled into their office. Reagan pulled up a chair next to Mary Ellen, who flipped the computer screen on and began going over everything Reagan would need to know to assist Zachary Benson, one of the most sought-after real estate developers in the nation. "I really hope I don't screw anything up." Reagan felt the knot in her stomach tighten again, and she feared her nerves were going to get the best of her. Lord knows she'd screwed up the last job she'd had. Suddenly every place he'd hit her throbbed with the memory of bruises. "He'll screw up plenty," Mary Ellen said, and Reagan shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Mary Ellen smiled and laid a gentle hand on her arm. "But that's how you learn." "Great," she wasn't reassured. "He's a softie. He only fires people once in a while." "And if he's a softie, what makes him fire people?" Reagan's attempt to hide the fear in her voice didn't completely work. "If you lose him a contract, he'll fire you on the spot," she said matter-of-factly. "I don't think you'll have to worry about it." Mary Ellen set forth to help Reagan understand contracts and bids. Though Reagan had been around many of the forms before, she worried that she was once again placing herself in the position of a caretaker of a very powerful man. Why would she think that she was doing the right thing when all she could do was concentrate on the physical pain she'd recovered from? Why hadn't she taken the job her brother had told her about at the hospital? She'd be filing papers, not making sure some CEO's coffee maker was turned off and his papers were on his desk in order. When the phone rang, Mary Ellen handed her the wireless headset and pushed a button. Reagan's eyes widened. She put on the headset, heard the line go live, her body stiffened, she swallowed hard. "Good morning, Mr. Benson's office," she said, having heard Mary Ellen offer the greeting moments earlier. "Good morning. May I speak to Mary Ellen Rothschild?" the man on the other end asked. "Of course, let me connect you." Reagan fumbled for the hold button and let out a sigh. "It's for you." Mary Ellen's eyebrows pinched together as she took the phone. "This is Mary Ellen." "Yes. Are you okay?" "Okay, I understand. In 10. That's fine." Her voice grew agitated as she replaced the receiver with a shake of her head. "Well, it looks like you get to run your desk for yourself for a few minutes. I have an urgent meeting in the lobby. I'll be back in just a few minutes. If anything comes up and you don't know the answer, just write it down, take a message. In a week, you're on your own anyway." She adjusted out of the chair and rubbed her side. "This is a good time to try and fly solo." Mary Ellen retrieved a legal pad and a pen from the desk drawer and headed towards the elevator. Reagan tried to settle into her new space, more than a little annoyed that she'd been training to be Zachary Benson's assistant and hadn't even shown up yet. How could you run an empire if you didn't even show up for work? Obviously, it was the kind of man Alexander Hamilton had been, the kind that pushes their employees to perform and then takes credit for their success. She took a moment to browse over his schedule in the computer and became familiar with the kinds of appointments she'd probably have to make excuses for when he didn't show up. There were plenty of meetings, both in Nashville and as far away as Los Angeles. She assumed she'd be present at most of them. Mary Ellen had made sure she had a very flexible schedule and could attend early and late meetings. She also needed to be available for business trips that lasted a week and trips that came up at the last moment. Sadly, this was something her life would allow. Her older commitments were to her family. She had dinner with them once a month, and it too was something she could reschedule if necessary. For today, he had a meeting off-site at 2 and a conference call at 6. She assumed, looking at the other days in his schedule, this was a laid-back day. Mary Ellen returned half an hour later and tossed her legal pad onto the desk. Any crisis? A Jason Agston from Steeple Concrete called and said the order was delayed and there was nothing more he could do about it. He'd appreciate if Zach could call him personally and get everything straightened out. And Miss Simone Pierpont called and said that would be fine. She waved her hand in the air with her French accent flowing, and Mary Ellen smiled. And his mother called and tried to get me to spill my life story when I said he wasn't in. She's a talker. She gets lonely during the day when her husband plays golf or is swimming. She knows someone here will always answer the phone. Will that impact my schedule much? Did the job include taking care of his mother too? Only if you marry him. That certainly wasn't going to happen. She looked at her watch, which now read 10:15. So where is he? That was him in the lobby. He's taken on a lunch meeting. He'll be here this afternoon. He's not coming up to meet me, Reagan snapped, though she didn't mean it to sound as angry as it did. Didn't he care whose hands he was going to be in? Mary Ellen shrugged. I'd say he's a pain in the ass, but really he's not. I'm not sure what he's doing today. He's usually up to his eyeballs in contracts by this time of the morning. Well, at least it'll be your concern soon. Mary Ellen sank into her chair and her eyes misted. She turned away, but Reagan had noticed. I have a feeling you'll miss him. Nah, Mary Ellen said, rubbing her stomach again and adjusting herself in her seat. It's only been 10 years. I can just walk away. She winced. Really, though, I interviewed 40 people out of 100 applicants. You were the one I knew would take best care of Zach. Reagan wasn't sure what to say to that. She'd hoped her vast knowledge of contracts had been why they'd hired her, not because she was most qualified to take care of Zachary Benson's personal needs, especially when he didn't have the decency to meet her. The thought left her uncomfortable with the prospect of the job at hand. Once she'd had a job for the same reason, and it hadn't ended in the best way. She didn't want to go through that again. I hope you enjoyed the chapter reading and that you'll go and check out the book. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.